us, but maybe we need to get going, and Monica will just jump in, so to speak, as we get going. So, as a third session of this roundtable on Green Goods Initiative, I should say the Environmental Goods Agreement that was launched this morning is the focus of our attention now. That we're calling a stepping stone towards effective climate change action, because we wanted to particularly focus your attention, as we would hope we would focus the attention of negotiators towards early and prompt action on the few goods that could make a big difference on climate. We're very privileged to have with us 4 representatives of the countries participating in the negotiations. We can take advantage of Monica not being here to say that we can think of the countries not as G14 but G41, really the initiative, if as a journalist mentioned this morning, because that's really what it is. There's 41 members of the WTO that have launched negotiations this morning on this environmental goods agreement. I have with me Ambassador Ronald Saborio of Costa Rica. He's the ambassador to the WTO. And I'm just introducing you very briefly, even though you are known in Geneva, because there's a podcast that will be going live, as well as transcripts of this conversation. So Ambassador Ronald Saborio is the ambassador of Costa Rica to the WTO here in Geneva. Madame Li Yihong, who is the Deputy Director General of the Department for WTO Affairs at MOFCOM, at the Chinese Ministry of Commerce in Beijing. Monica Hengsi, who joined us in a moment, and Monica is the head of unit at DigiTrade that handles these negotiations on environment. Jennifer Prescott, Assistant USTR in the Office of the U.S. Trade Representative in Washington. Surab Sen, who is the co-chairman of Aston Field Renewables. Surab would tell us a bit more about the company itself, but it's a fascinating company that deploys renewable energy technologies, particularly in developing country markets. Peter Boone, I should say my colleague at ICTSD. Peter is Senior Fellow at ICTSD and Managing Director of the SETI Alliance. The SETI Alliance is the Sustainable Energy Trade Initiatives Alliance that brings together companies from China, India, Europe, the US, and industry associations working towards action on renewable energies around the world, action on trade. Jake Colvin, who's Vice President on Global Trade for the National Foreign Trade Council in Washington, and Pierre Tardin, who is Senior Political Advisor at the European Wind Energy Association, one of the members of the SETI Alliance. So what I'll try to do with this session, which may be a bit different to what you're used to, is go to each of the panelists individually first, and ask them to put an emphasis on a particular aspect of their participation in the initiative or their perspective from their private sector stance, and then open to the public for 1 or 2 questions, hopefully rather than remarks, to that panelist, and then we can go back to a second one, and so on. And that way we can have more of a conversation instead of having a stream of presentations as we did this morning. So allow me to start perhaps with Ambassador Saborio. And Ambassador Saborio is a well-known promoter of the WTO system. And so I want to ask Ambassador Saborio particularly to speak to us about the participation of Costa Rica from a Latin American perspective, a developing country perspective, as well as, again, his own, known stance to strengthen the multilateral trade system. and his participation in this initiative of this morning. Ronald, maybe we can open with you then.
Thank you, Ricardo. Thank you for the invitation to this very interesting event. I was here this morning, and I was very glad to witness the kind of discussion that we had. I'd like to indicate first what is the motivation for a country such as mine to join an initiative like this one. Why a country, small country, developing country, is ready to take the burden of a negotiation that will lead it to the reduction and the elimination of tariffs in a number of areas, and hopefully of trade barriers, and lead one day to the liberalization of environmental services. This is a wish. This is not something that the group has agreed on. This is my very wish. Costa Rica is a country that is not new in the protection of the environment. You may have heard of its unilateral decisions, for instance, to renounce to open air mining. Costa Rica renounced as well to the exploration and exploitation of fossil fuels a number of years ago. And this has put in front of us a number of challenges. However, Costa Rica has been doing a very good work in looking for renewable sources. As of today, 90% of the electricity is produced based on renewable sources. This includes wind, sun, solar energy, as well as geothermal. The most important source is hydroelectric power, of course. Costa Rica is an early adopter of carbon taxes. We adopted this back in 1996, introducing a program of payment for environmental services. Another interesting signal of our interest in protecting the environment is that Costa Rica is the only country in the tropic that have reversed the trend of deforestation. In 1986, only 22% of the territory was covered by forest because of the deforestation. Today, it is 52.3%. And this makes Costa Rica, as I said, the only country not only that stopped the trend, but moving in the opposite direction. In 2012, Costa Rica launched a carbon neutrality certification program. And to date, there are more than 20 companies, ranging from small and middle-sized enterprises to multinational corporations in different sectors, that have obtained the certification. The other steps that we have taken is to be transparent with regard to our own policies and be ready to revise them and be ready to evaluate them. And because of this, Costa Rica has approached the OECD. The OECD published last year the investment policy review of Costa Rica with a chapter dealing with environment protection that is a very important tool for our own evaluation of our policies. Instead of advocating for policy space, we have submitted ourselves to the highest standards in the OECD as to know whether we are doing the best that we can with regard to environment protection. So this, I say this because I want to put the correct background behind. Costa Rica is convinced that there is no contradiction between protection of the environment, trade, and development. We think that all of them work together and complement each other. I'd like to say that we see this as a win-win exercise, and that's why we are not only participating in the negotiations that have been launched this morning, but we are committed to do outreach and try to bring other developing countries to the negotiating table. This requires, I believe, to think outside of our traditional trade box. Whether or not this agreement adjusts to or goes beyond the Doha mandate, well, for us, that's not the point. The point is that climate change and other environmental challenges need to be addressed now. And the trade environment communities must work in synergy towards this objective. We think that it is necessary to receive feedback from the climate change, from the environment and business communities in order for us to be up to the speed regarding what types of challenges and barriers are emerging and how the industry have changed. This is something that changes fast, and we don't want to be in the situation that we are today with regard to ITA. We need to revise the list and be sure that by the time that we come to an agreement, the list is not obsolete. Now, with regard to other Latin American countries, I'd like to share with you that when we analyze this kind of commitments, for instance, the Green Growth Declaration of the OECD, which is an instrument, a very interesting instrument from 2009, in which members commit to fight together to protect the environment and to find solutions for the climate change. Countries can approach this kind of instruments and learn about the advantages that they can obtain by adopting this kind of measures unilaterally. And that's what we have been doing. We approach other countries, we approach other developing countries, and we try to explain that this is something that can be done by any country. It's only for our own good that we do it. Thank you. I don't know.
Thank you very much.
Will you take questions at this stage? Or
yes, why don't we do that? And let me just open briefly the floor. If anybody would like to address the issues that Ambassador Rio have mentioned, or ask questions about the participation of Costa Rica specifically in this initiative. So may I open the floor? Yes, please. Hutao in the back.
Thank you very much, Ambassador. Hutao from WWF. Thank you very much, Ambassador. Very interesting to learn what Costa Rica is doing. And you mentioned the hydropower. I have a question about so how you look at the hydropower products. Obviously, hydropower products can contribute to the greenhouse gas emission reduction. But hydro itself might potentially also have negative impacts on biodiversity, especially for tropical forest region like Costa Rica. Do you define the hydropower products as environmental goods or not? Thank you very much.
Thank you, Hutao. Anybody else on that? I take it the question really refers, of course, you've asked very straightforward. Is about the goods related to hydropower generation. The question is not whether the goods are environmental or not, but rather whether there is an environmental aspect to take into account there. Ronald?
Thank you. We're well aware that hydro power can have negative effects, or the decisions to produce electricity through water can damage the environment. That's what happened when we decided to build a dam in Arenal in the early 70s. However, we recognize as of today those risks, and the most important hydroelectric project of Costa Rica was stopped by the civil society some years ago, and it was never built. We recognize that there is a contradiction between forest protection and this kind of projects. The way in which we administer our current production of electricity with water, we believe that makes it qualify as developing friendly. And the decision of Costa Rica to renounce to more hydroelectric plants and move to eolic, geothermal, biomass, and solar is a recognition of some of the negative sides of that kind of production of electricity.
Thank you, Laurel. Let me now turn to Madame Li and ask her, obviously, to speak from the Chinese perspective about their participation in this initiative, but also mention what is obvious in everybody's minds, which is how China has been particularly the target of certain types of measures, and some of the Chinese companies have complained about non-tariff barriers as perhaps the most critical that affect their operations in global markets. Then, of course, how do you see this initiative addressing these issues, if at all? So, Madame Li.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you for inviting me to be here. And I'm very pleased to join this discussion. It's China's motivation to participate in this initiative. Actually, this question has been raised, and quite a lot of people during the lunch break also raised me these questions. So I would like here to brief some of the thoughts for our motivation. First, as this initiative is consistent with China's efforts to meet the climate change and environment protection needs. It is no secret to all that environment problems become one of most challenging tasks to China. For this reason, Chinese government has taken a number of measures and policies, such as encouraging the utilization of clean energy, enhancing pollution management, and so on, as response to such challenges. So to China, as a developing country and a country having a heavy task to address the environmental problems, the end goal of these negotiations to us is not simply to liberalize trade in environmental goods, but through such kind of liberalization, it would improve the capability of us, especially the country like China, the developing ones, to combat the climate change and environment problems, and finally creating triple win situation beneficial to trade, environment, and development. Further than that, I would also like to emphasize that as the climate change and environment problems are the global challenges, it is critical to have more WTO members to join this initiative, so to make this initiative meaningful as a global response to a global challenge. So as many of the WTO members are developing ones, so how to take this make this negotiation more attractive to developing members and to make them more confident to join such initiative, I think it should be an issue that we need to discuss further, and in the future negotiation, we should take this into account. And for China, we also think it is a follow-up action to the APEC initiative. As you all know, that last year in Bali, our leaders agreed to explore this initiative in the WTO. So I think that this initiative is just a response to that one, to the APEC members. And we hope that through this initiative and under the WTO framework, more members will join us. And the last point I would like to raise on the China's motivation for this negotiation is that we hope that this negotiation could provide important impetus to the multilateral negotiation, especially to the Doha round negotiation. So in that case, we think that it is important for this group to 14 participants to explore ways to link this negotiation with the post-Bali negotiation to really make real contribution to our multilateral trading system. And also, I think that if we could conclude this negotiation, it could at least show that WTO is still can work and especially can respond to the global challenges that emerge. So I think that those are the motivations for China to join this initiative. As the question about the NTMs and our expectation from our industries on how to address such NTMs and barriers they meet, I think that's a very important issue to China's companies. As you know, recent years, China is the most suffered with some of the NTMs. So we have strong voices from our industries to well deal this with our counterparts. But however, in this negotiation, as we all agree at this moment, we will focus on the tariff issues. But for China, we also worked very intensively with our counterparts bilaterally and maybe in some other forum to see how could be well addressed on NTMs. And we also hope that in the post-Bali negotiation, NTM issues could also be well addressed, since there are more NTMs, as people mentioned in the morning session, that it is really an issue that need to be addressed by the WTO. Thank you.
Thank you, Madam Li. Could I offer the floor for questions or comments on Madam Li's remarks at this stage? Anybody? Okay. You had something, Johannes? To move through. This is like an option. If you move your hand, I take it. But, no. Okay. So let me move on to Monica Hengsi, and we'll come back to both Madame Li and Ambassador Saudi in a moment. Monica, okay. So you have been promoting this negotiation, and we saw this morning that the EU already has liberalized most of the products that for the moment are on the table. And so from that perspective, could you just tell us a bit more about the motivation of the EU in this participating in this group?
Thank you very much, and good afternoon to everybody. Let me first just thank you for the opportunity to speak at this very useful event. I have also attended the morning session and certainly learned a lot from the various experts on goods, services, and NTBs. In the morning press conference, our ambassador, the EU ambassador, has already mentioned 6 good reasons why the EU thought this was a very worthwhile initiative to support. And I would like to reiterate these 6 elements and give you a little bit of more detailed background of what we mean by that. From the EU perspective, this agreement will first and foremost boost global trade in green goods and services. looking at some of the data that was also presented this morning, it is still a relatively small industry compared to manufacturing as a whole. But it is clear that it is an industry that is growing very fast, and we can see a double-digit growth in some segments of it, and there are estimates that it may double or triple in the future. So we do want to boost and take opportunity in this global market. Goods were mentioned, but also services. We are looking for a future-oriented agreement because in today's business environment, it is clear that a lot of the value creation is also in the services segment. OECD reports have shown that 65% of the market is in services and only the rest in goods. Talking to our industry, what we hear from them is when you deliver a wind turbine, you need also to deliver the associated services with it. You need to be able to test it, to install it, and to maintain it. And so we need to open up the market in both goods and services. At the same time, we do realize that primarily at the first stage, we will be focusing on first defining the relevant goods, and this is a goods agreement, while we can equally discuss some of the services aspect. A second reason why the EU is keen on this initiative is to support our green industry. The EU has a leading industry. We are proud of our entrepreneurial spirit and innovation in this sector. We are a leading exporter of these goods, and most of our exports actually goes to other members of this initiative. So there is a clear economic interest here to be part of this deal. Thirdly, and probably most importantly for today's discussion, is that we do believe that this initiative will help meet the climate and energy targets in view of the conclusion of the new climate agreement in 2015 in Paris. We do have a very ambitious CO2 emission targets in the EU. We are committed to reduce by 20% these emissions by 2020, and there are proposals for even doubling this target to 40% by 2030. We are a great believer that this sort of trade initiative can play a direct contribution and help us meet those targets. We are cooperating with many countries in this respect, also around the table. For instance, with China, we have an emission trading project where we are trying to identify how we can reduce emissions together. And so I think that having this win where we talk about these issues in the climate change context as well as in the trade context, including some emerging and developing countries, is indeed very valuable. Fourth aspect for us is also to provide an opportunity for all the countries who are interested and share the ambition to join this initiative as they seek cheaper access to those technologies that we, the EU, but also other countries can offer. We are a major exporter, but we are also the world's largest importers of these goods. And we need those goods for our rapid urbanization and for green growth. Urbanization, of course, is not only happening in Europe, and if anything, it is happening elsewhere today. And we do think that some of the technologies that we will be looking at can really help that urbanization process to happen in a sustainable way. We are talking about cheaper access of technologies, but also job creation. In the EU, we are struggling with the economic crisis. However, we have seen that in this sector, employment has been increasing by 20% annually. Such jobs can be created in the EU, but also in other countries part of this initiative. In fact, we have recently seen some figures that 30% of value is created in the local markets where the good is imported into. And as such, we do think that this initiative can help sustainable development in its three pillars: economy, environmental, but also social job creation. The fifth reason why the EU is joining this initiative is to enhance our energy security. As you know, we are in a difficult political context these days, and energy security is becoming an even more stressing issue. We are importing a lot of fossil fuels today, but we are really committed to ensure that we meet our ambitious renewable energy targets, where 20% of our energy mix should come from the renewable energy. And again, this is a target that we intend to increase to 27% by 2030. And last but not least, we do agree with the previous comment of our Chinese friends here that this initiative can create a real impetus for the multilateral trading system and the WTO. We believe that we here are indirectly supporting the DDA mandate of liberalizing green goods and services, including non-tariff barriers, and that this plurilateral initiative that nevertheless is open to any of the WTO members, and it will apply on an MFN basis, can bring real energy into the broader multilateral trading system. Thank you.
Well, thank you, Monica. Again, let me offer the floor again if anybody would like to, at this stage, to ask the Commission any question, make any comment. Yes, please, in the back.
Thank you for the opportunity. I have one question to Monica. Now we are taking the multilateral and plurilateral initiative on the green products, but is the European Union going to address the same in the free trade agreements that it's negotiating with bilateral partners? Thank you.
Thank you. Anybody else would like to follow on that or any other subject for Monica? No, Monica, please.
The EU has been historically a proponent of liberalization of green goods, and indeed we have brought those discussions into all the fora that we can. We've been a great supporter of the discussions in the WTO on these issues, but equally we have in a number of our recent trade agreements front-loaded green goods. So those will be goods on which tariffs will be immediately cut as soon as the agreements are provisionally applied. Even probably more importantly, we are negotiating with a number of countries so-called green tech or annexes that also look into some of the NTB issues in the renewable energy sector. So the answer is yes, we do address and intend to address these issues equally in our bilateral and regional discussions as well as in the multilateral context.
Thank you, Monica. So let me turn now to Jennifer Prescott and ask Jennifer again from the U.S. perspective, sort of following up on what we have said here. How do you see the relevance of the initiative? I was just out of mic, sorry. So from the following up from what we have said this morning and now, how does the U.S. see the relevance of the initiative in responding to global climate change objectives? Jennifer.
Thank you, and thank you as well to you and to ICTSD for pulling together this event here today. We do appreciate it. I just sort of add to others that have already spoken that, I mean, the U.S. has also been a long held advocate for liberalization of environmental goods and services, and have been working with many, all of the people at this table and many in this room for a number of years. And so today is a very exciting day. It's been a long time of building momentum and support along the way, and appreciate all the work that's gone into this. We certainly do see the nexus with climate change and with environmental protection more generally, and many others have spoken about this being a very unique trade initiative in terms of the benefits that can come from liberalizing trade in environmental goods that we all need to protect our environment, to address climate change. By eliminating those tariffs, we can basically cut unnecessary costs of these technologies and make them cheaper and more accessible around the world. And so that's the rationale. That's the win-win that we have at play. I would also add that President Obama has also taken a leadership role on this issue, including in 2011 when the United States hosted APEC. And we were able to sort of move the needle on this issue by getting 21 APEC economies together, rallied around to reduce tariffs on environmental goods and to move this issue forward. And you know, APEC has really played an important role as well, continuing into this year as China hosts APEC and is going to be launching the first ever public-private partnership event on environmental goods and services, and work continues on NTBs, which have been discussed by many in this room already today, and so that work also continues in APEC. The President also added in his climate action plan, which was announced last year, in terms of international action that the United States is committed to taking to address climate change, this initiative, basically calling for global free trade in environmental goods, and announcing his commitment to launch this agreement. And so U.S. commitment comes at a very high level, and we are very excited and are looking forward to working with all of the current partners as well as additional WTO members that are like-minded and similarly committed in moving this initiative forward. As others have already mentioned, global trade in environmental goods is already about $1 trillion annually and has been growing in some subsectors at even double-digit rates. So there is a tremendous amount to be gained by eliminating tariffs in this fast-growing sector for our economies, creating green jobs, but also, again, the environmental benefits that can come for the climate, but also, looking at technologies for clean drinking water, waste treatment, etc. So, a broad range of products as we committed in the statement earlier this year in January in Davos. So maybe I'll just stop there and.
I'll open again the floor. Thank you, Jennifer, to see if there's anybody who would like to ask questions at this stage for Jennifer in the U.S. Not, let me maybe myself ask a question, and is how do you see both the idea of a living list as a concept, something that has been proposed by some of our colleagues, given the dynamism in environmental technologies particularly, but also the addressing services here or through other venues. So some services associated with renewable energies and with environmental goods.
Well, we certainly are committed to negotiating what will hopefully be a dynamic agreement, and one that can keep the pace of technology, which is not easy to do, admittedly. But we're also focused on getting an agreement in place, and so that is the first priority getting a broad agreement that is both commercially significant and environmentally credible. And, you know, but I think in the longer term, of course, you know, I think we and others are committed to a dynamic agreement. I mean, in terms of environmental services, we of course also agree that it's very important to while we're creating new market access opportunities for environmental goods, to also be doing that for our environmental services providers. We do have the TISA negotiations that we and many others are participating in, that is broadly addressing services, including environmental services, and we've been working very closely with our services colleagues to ensure that attention is being given in particular to the various environmental services that are being bundled increasingly with environmental goods.
Thank you, Jennifer. Yeah, there's a question back in the room again. So could you identify yourself as you ask the question?
My name is Sufyan Jusso. I'm from the World Trade Institute. I would like to ask Jennifer regarding the interrelationship between the environmental goods and access to technology, especially in the light of the current negotiations in the TPPA and some of the developing country members negotiating parties in the TPPA is a bit worried about access to intellectual properties and the fact that there is a perception that some negotiating parties in the TPPA is pushing for a longer or WTO plus protection, and whether the current initiative on environmental goods will contradict the existing negotiations taking place, and whether this will be in the interest of the developing country. Thank you.
Thanks for the question. I'm not sure I entirely understand what other negotiation you're referring to. But that said, you know, I think our view is that by liberalizing trade in environmental technologies, that has been shown through various research that trade is a vehicle that spurs innovation and helps developing countries to leapfrog to some of these new technologies, which perhaps they haven't been able to develop in their own country. So, I mean, we're quite optimistic that trade liberalization can be that vehicle to spur innovation.
Thank you, Jennifer. Maybe Madame Lee can also comment on this point.
Just a few more words on the relationship between the liberalization of the goods to the access to the technology. Actually, it is a very important question to the developing countries. We have such kind of discussions in the WTO before and also in the other forum. Yes, some people said that liberalization of goods can automatically lead to the technology diffusion, but others will say how and why. And we can always hear that complaints from developing countries that when they open the market, technology has not come into their country automatically. So I think it's an issue we need to further to look at, how to ensure that while the developing countries open their market, they will also get their own industries developed together with the advancing technologies. Yeah, thank you.
Thank you very much, Madame Lee. Ambassador Saudio?
Thank you, Ricardo. I'd like to make a brief comment with regard to this, the access of technology through trade and through trade liberalization. I mentioned a while ago the example of the ITA and how the list of products became obsolete, not because these products were irrelevant, but because many of the products should be part of the list as of today. When I negotiated this agreement, I remember very well in Singapore, a big developing country from Latin America coming to me telling me, Ronald, you don't export a dime on information technology. What is going on here? And my answer was, listen, if we want to continue not exporting these products, keep the market closed. As of today, Costa Rica's most important sector of exportation is information technology. And this has boosted many other areas. For instance, services, corporate services is the most important sector in services today, and it surpassed agriculture last year. And this has an enormous content of information technology. Medical devices is another very important sector in Costa Rica. The second one in manufacturing, and it is a sector that is connected to high-tech global value chains. 40% of our industrial exportations are linked to high-end global value chains. What I'm trying to say with this is that progress don't come if you don't look for it. When you're a developing country, you have to decide and implement policies that will allow you and your industries to have access to the kind of technology we are discussing today. I'm convinced that one of the most important benefits for developing countries would be to have access to this kind of technologies.
Thank you very much, Ronald. Monica, anything you'd like to add at this time? Okay, so then let me move, and we'll come back to the delegates that we have in the panel in a moment. But let me move to the private sector and start with Sudab Sen. And as I mentioned before, Sudab is an entrepreneur that it's moving renewable energy goods and services into developing countries particularly. And so obviously what we're interested to hear from you is what kind of barriers, what kind of obstacles do you find from a trade policy perspective in your operations? Sudab.
Thank you for the introduction, Ricardo, and thank you, ICTSD, for this wonderful opportunity to be part of this very important conversation and this august group this afternoon. Let me begin by telling you a bit about Aston Field. Aston Field is a leading provider of renewable energy assets in rapidly developing markets like India, East Africa, and Middle East. We develop, own, and operate a growing portfolio of utility-scale solar plants, and we consider ourselves long-term owners of renewable power assets. We are also committed to driving the development of clean energy solutions in rapidly developing countries. Aston Field established itself early on as a premier developer of renewable energy power plants in the Indian solar market. We take a technology-agnostic approach to developing renewable power projects, which enable us to utilize the most abundant local resources of individual communities, unlike other project developers who deploy one solution for all communities. It also enables us to choose the high-quality technology that is the best fit for each project. In addition to our utility-scale solar efforts, Aston Field is now delivering power solutions to private markets in East Africa, India, and the Middle East. This is largely due to a joint venture we recently entered into with the Italian engineering and project management leader, Solesa. The goal of the JV is to deliver highly customized solar energy solutions to save fuel cost, reduce power outages, and increase the cost of competitiveness of industrial businesses across India and Eastern Africa. It is extremely important that solar companies maintain a world-class quality standard. Aston Field was the first company to receive an A credit rating for a solar power plant in India from CRISIL, a Standard & Poor's company. We received this rating because the plant represents a low risk profile with regard to return on investment. At its core, this achievement was made possible because the plant was constructed with world-class materials, partners, and standards as well as a quality labor force. There are a lot of projects in India that have performed far less than expected because developers sacrifice the quality of materials or skilled workforce in order to reduce cost of execution. Aston Field is a global company that operates in countries that are mostly energy deficient and energy hungry. These markets suffer from acute power shortages, affecting the lives of hundreds of millions of people and impacting the economies and human development of these nations. I strongly support policy and regulation, which are vital for the development of clean energy both domestically and globally. Even in developed nations, renewable energy are relatively young, and most markets continue to benefit from subsidies and government support for their successful implementation. Not only must we eliminate tariffs on environmental goods that support renewable energy, an effective policy framework must also address domestic content rules and minimize trade disputes. The solar supply chain is global, and any trade restrictions or barriers can have a profound impact throughout the supply chain. India is a classic example, where a domestic content requirement or anti-dumping investigation has been pursued since the implementation of its national policy. This policy environment has created extreme uncertainty, virtually freezing solar installation growth. Solar installation growth in India was flat from 2012 to 2013 and is forecasted to be flat again in 2014. For companies like Aston Field, frozen project development will impede growth and directly affect our bottom line and our ability to bring clean energy to markets that are in desperate need of alternative energy supplies. In emerging markets like India, Africa, and the Middle East, where solar is still in its infancy, trade wars are unnecessary distractions and add uncertainty to young markets where financing is already the largest challenge, and foreign investments are sorely needed. The priorities should lie with supporting the use of proven, reliable technologies and driving competition in free markets. Going back to the topic of tariffs for a moment, we know that eliminating tariffs on products such as solar panels would lead to lower prices, greater availability of these products, but it will also help create jobs across the supply chain. It is well documented that the solar industry creates more jobs per megawatt than any other renewable source. For a sector that has seen nominal installation growth over the last few years, imposing anti-dumping duties will be detrimental not only to local PV manufacturers, in case the duty is imposed on raw materials like polysilicon, but also to power producers, as higher component costs make projects economically unviable and project development is drastically slowed, and to the end user, as solar prices will radically increase. If the duty is only on finished modules, then it would benefit the local module manufacturer to the detriment of the solar power producer. But power producers and end consumers are affected wherever along the supply chain the anti-dumping duties hit. The solar sector has drastically changed in the last couple of years, becoming more efficient with more processes automated. We have seen a rapid reduction in solar module prices, and modules that used to make up 60% of total systems cost now only account for 35%. On the other hand, global solar installations have been growing at about 15 to 20% annually. This year, we are expected to put 46 gigawatts on the ground. This will have a huge impact on green jobs. Most of the solar jobs today and in the future will be in development, operation, and maintenance, as these jobs cannot be automated. There are also the skilled jobs that are mostly undertaken by the local labor forces. As members come together to decide on which environmental goods would benefit from a zero import tariff, I encourage them to look across the supply chain for renewable energy. Balance of system components, especially in solar energy, accounts for the next largest piece of the solar system cost after modules. And it is important that these components are included in the final list of environment goods to benefit from reduced or absolutely eliminated tariffs. Raw materials like polysilicon and wafers are other vital parts of the solar system that should be on that list. Having a supportive policy and trade environment is very, very important for the development of clean, green energy. Not only will it contribute to job growth and a better environment, it will contribute to economies of important emerging markets by bringing power to people who desperately need it. I thank you for having me here in this panel, and I appreciate all the work that ICTSD is doing.
Thank you very much, Sudhab. I think that's a very compelling statement. Let me just add a couple of factoids that I thought I would add this morning to Michael's presentation. I didn't, but they go well with what you just said. They come from the UNEP report that I mentioned before, which was launched last week by Akim Steiner in Nairobi, written by Mahesh Sugatan and René Bolsenar. And one of the pieces of data that is very interesting there is that developing countries added in 2013 20.7 gigawatts of energy capacity in wind installations only, which is, to give you an idea, what is needed to power about 190 million American homes at energy consumption levels that they have. Now, what's very interesting too about this is that most of this came through South-South trade. So that's again something that it's a fact. In solar is the numbers are very similar as well, with very large trade between, for instance, China and South Africa, Ethiopia, Egypt, that is contributing to energy access, off-grid solutions in many of these countries, as well as to basically securing energy, so enhancing energy security. But let me again offer the floor to the audience to follow up on Sudhab's presentation, if anyone has any question there. Yes, please, sir.
Good afternoon. I'm Vivek Johari from the Permanent Mission of India to the WTO. I'd like to thank all the panelists for their presentations and remarks. I just have a question. I'm a little confused as a trade negotiator, so I thought I'll seek this clarification. The drift of the discussion both in the morning and now seems to be that if we decide to liberalize trade in environmental goods, for example, then there should be a moratorium on trade remedies. I'm not able to understand this argument because, according to my understanding, trade remedies are meant to serve a different purpose, and there's a full-fledged WTO agreement to deal with certain situations which are frowned upon as being malpractices in the course of international trade, which trade remedies seek to correct. So, and just because we decide to liberalize trade in certain goods, does it automatically mean that there should be no trade remedy action against those goods? Is that the direction of the argument? I'm not able to understand this, because then it can extend to other areas. And where do you draw the line? It could be ITA, it could be agricultural goods. So, I mean, those agreements have a purpose after all.
Okay, anybody else would like to follow on that question by the Indian delegate? If not, let me see if anyone in the panel would like to address that issue at this stage. Monica, perhaps, can you?
Yeah, thank you very much. I mean, on trade remedies versus trade liberalization, I think I explained why the EU sees really a win-win of trade liberalization. We think it will allow us to have better access and lower cost technologies, more jobs and more competition. On the other hand, unfair trading practices in the long term do lead to higher concentration, less competition, eventually higher prices and less jobs. So I would agree with the comment that these are rather separate issues, even if they cover the same industry, but they may have positive or negative effects on some of the very same elements that we are trying to address here today. We do want more jobs, we do want more competition, we do want lower prices, and trade remedies are not helpful in that and the unfair trading practices are not helpful in that respect. Do I believe, however, that by coming together to the table and having discussions in depth on this sector will eventually help us to also avoid some of those unfair trading practices? Very much so. So I think that us being around now involved in intense negotiation will allow a better understanding of each other to actually solve issues before they arise and not have to engage in so-called trade wars. Thank you.
Thank you, Monica. Madam Liu?
Okay, thank you. With regard to whether liberalization of goods will automatically lead to no trade remedies, actually, the answer is definitely, to my understanding, is no. But when people talking about liberalization of environmental goods, also, as some people said that, how about those search of remedy issues? So it is a question to us, because on the one side, when we are trying our efforts to achieve the liberalization of goods, to make all those tariffs eliminated, but on the other hand, we have the trade remedies there, and also raise the barriers for the trade flows. That's not so consistent. So what I want to say is that on the one side, we achieve the liberalization. On the other side, we should carefully use those trade remedies. Currently, the situation to us seems sometimes for the protection purpose, the trade remedies has a trend to be misused. So that's the trend. We should prevent it. So to ensure that our efforts to achieve the liberalization of green goods could be consistent with what our other trade policies. Thank you.
Yes, thank you, Madam Lee. We'd like to say something, Jennifer.
Yeah, just quickly, just to clarify, I think that some speakers have been talking about trade remedies in the context of an environmental goods agreement, and I just would echo some others who have said that trade remedies, and specifically agreements in the WTO that deal with that, are intended to address unfairly traded imports that are causing injury to a domestic industry. And that is, those are agreements, those are rights that belong to all WTO members. And so, I don't know, I don't want to speak on behalf of those who have proposed that somehow we do something more about those things, but I mean, our view is that that's a very separate issue from what we're trying to do in this agreement, which is liberalize trade, eliminate tariffs.
Thank you, Jennifer. Maybe just a quick comment from my side. Of course, in an ideal world, making the rules and the practice around the application of remedies better is probably a good objective too. It's not the immediate the immediate purpose of the environmental goods agreement. But for instance, if we were focused on doing more for clean energy, it wouldn't be a bad thing in the future to think about, for instance, making trade remedies on clean energy limited in level by making use of a lesser duty rule, or trade remedies limited in time, or trade remedies limited in scope, for example, by only permitting measures on a certain number of clean energy products or certain import value, or introducing criteria on the climate change in national public interest tests. So there are several ways in which this can be made better, but also focus to target clean energy technologies. I mean, a good rationale for doing something about remedies is the fact that remedy action has, for sort of natural reasons, responding to the kind of dynamics that we saw this morning on investment and in markets, has surged in the past few years with respect to clean energy technologies. It's true, as you said, that there have been proposals from the academic side on moratoria or on peace clause type of of approaches to dealing with it. But there's also something more that could happen, and we're hoping that in the environmental goods negotiations, as has been said here, serve in a way to also promote more consultation, more transparency, and the way in which, for instance, cost studies are taken up and so on with respect to trade remedies to bring less friction in that sector. That's my editorial comment very quickly. And let me just turn to Jake Colmy now and invite Jake. I know that you have to go at 3:30, Jake, and it would be good to hear from you from the U.S. industry perspective on the environmental goods launch this morning. Jake.
Thank you, Ricardo. And for those of you who don't know, the National Foreign Trade Council, we're a U.S.-based association that promotes an open rules-based trading system on behalf of major multinational companies, some of whom are here in Geneva with us. I think first just wanted to say congratulations to all the countries on the panel and in the audience. You all deserve a tremendous amount of credit for the launch this morning. We're very enthusiastic, and I know there's a lot of work to be done. But what today represents is the culmination of a lot of hard work across a variety of different forums, from the OECD to APEC to the WTO and sort of back again. And so this is something to be proud of, and we congratulate you. I also want to say thank you to ICTSD for the opportunity here. I've known Ricardo and Ingrid for a long time now, and ICTSD deserves a lot of credit for placing an environmental goods initiative in the larger climate and environmental context. And they've been one of the more effective associations, and I think one of the only ones that has been promoting this idea not only in trade forums, but in places like the UN Framework Convention on Climate Change. I just wanted to say a couple of words about how we and our members see this agreement potentially affecting business, the environment, and the system at the WTO, because we and our members are supportive of all three of those things. The first is that the environmental goods agreement presents a real opportunity for producers, and you see that among some of our members who have submitted comments in the U.S. Federal Register process, like General Electric and Ingersoll Rand. And there's a lot of enthusiasm among the broader business community, both in the United States and around the world. I'm here with colleagues from the National Association of Manufacturers and the U.S. Council for International Business, and we're going to launch this week officially a U.S. business coalition for green trade, with the goal of supporting an ambitious and swift conclusion to the environmental goods agreement. We're also joined by a number of our colleagues from the global business community. We're going to be holding a business roundtable later on today and releasing later on today a letter signed by over 40 business associations from countries around the world, including some that are not part of the negotiations, business associations from Indonesia and South Africa, that indicates our support for the initiative. This is also good for the environment. And what I'm starting to see is enthusiasm from some of our member companies who are consumers of environmental technologies and clean tech. So to give you an example, Walmart is one of our board members, and they note in their comments to the U.S. government that an environmental goods agreement can help achieve their environmental sustainability goals by lowering the cost of adopting the technologies that they would implement in their stores among the countries that are participants in the negotiations. And so they've pointed to things like solar and geothermal and LED lighting as being important to them. And then finally, this is, I think, good and important for the system. This agreement is really a unique opportunity at the WTO. What I think what we and our members are frustrated about often is when we come to Geneva, we hear that cutting tariffs equals pain, as the EU ambassador said this morning. What Ambassador Saborio said just before, I think, is important, which is that this is an agreement to which anyone can be a part, and it's an agreement that benefits anyone who is part of the agreement. Cutting tariffs will reduce the cost of adopting these technologies and encourage their dissemination and deployment. That's, I mean, good in its own right, and it's good because it can eventually promote additional technologies and innovation on top of those platforms. If you think back to the ITA negotiations, you couldn't really have imagined all of the services that would have been possible on top of the technology that was liberalized. But now today, you see countries like India and Costa Rica that have improved their business process outsourcing operations by a tremendous amount. And that wouldn't have been possible without the liberalization of the underlying hardware and technology. I just sort of echo what Jennifer said about the importance that President Obama puts on this in the context of climate and the environment as well. as part of his action plan. And so I hope that countries will think a little bit differently about this agreement as an opportunity and not as pain. And I think it also serves as an opportunity to demonstrate the viability of the WTO as a negotiating forum, and to be nimble and flexible, and to respond to things that benefit global business and the global good at the same time. This is tangible to people when you talk about it, when you use trade policy to help improve environmental outcomes. And I think the WTO needs a couple of wins. It needs to put some points on the board. And just as an aside, one way to do that would be to continue to effectively implement the trade facilitation agreement that was negotiated and is a priority. I think it is certainly a priority of our organization. But the environmental goods agreement is another way to do that. I think finally I wanted to just emphasize there needs to be, I think, a balance of flexibility but efficiency in the negotiations. And so what we as the U.S. business community have emphasized is the need to focus exclusively on tariffs first, on cutting tariffs as part of this environmental goods exercise. We're certainly cognizant of non-tariff barriers and the importance of environmental services, but to take on all of that at once I think would be detrimental to the process. And so we hope that negotiators can both focus exclusively on tariff elimination right now and then figure out how to address these issues in other ways down the line. So thank you.
Thank you very much, Jake. Let me go now, if I may, to Peter Brun and Pierre Tarteux before hoping we have a little more time for interaction with the audience. Peter, would you like to?
Thank you, Ricardo. I represent the City Alliance, which is an international multi-stakeholder coalition with a handful of what I could call first-mover companies, first-mover governments, research institutions, and international organizations. The aim basically is to advocate for an international environmental trade agreement, not only for goods, but more broadly also. We fully sign on to the approach that we start with goods, but we hope after a relatively fast period you can continue with negotiations on services and more complicated areas. The City Alliance was established only 1.5 years ago. We thought at that time more needs to be done. You need, as negotiators, to hear the voice of the industry. It would be a good move for you to do this for many good reasons, as you have heard today. It is about shared welfare gains in many different markets. It is not that gains only go to one part of the world, but it will be distributed all along. So it is a very prominent and strong sustainability regulatory move if governments decide so. The reasons why this is necessary, because this is not a new issue on the table, as you all understand and knows. There has been many years of discussion of classification in the CTE under the Doha round, and you all know the result of that process. What started out as a nice to have approach is today a need to have approach, because the renewables and clean industry has in the last 3 to 4 years seen a surge of new trade barriers, instruments playing into their markets. And they come in all forms. They come in classical tariff form. They come in the form of non-tariff barriers like local content requirements, other barriers, non-tariff ones. They come also in the form of limitations into government procurement, the high use of trade defense instruments we have also seen in recent years. And they come also with restrictions into services. And this is a very explosive development that the clean green industry has seen over the last few years, and a very potential cocktail, or potentially dangerous cocktail for this industry going forward. Because you will recognize that the clean green industries are very conscious of driving down the cost of energy and the price of these technologies. But if they are also being met with new barriers coming up in markets, it would be a very difficult handling operation with a cost or price to it, which will set a roadblock into this development of reducing cost of energy for these technologies here. So it is potentially very serious. I want to my final comment goes to you having an understanding of what this industry is today. It's correct, it started off more than 30 years ago as an industry, pioneer industry in selective national markets. Today it is a globalized industry with global supply chains. And part of the reason why the industry have succeeded so well in driving down the cost curve and are now with credibility starting to talk about reaching grid parity has been because of the internationalization of their markets and the global supply chains. It would be very difficult to move back that development, and it would also be wrong, and it certainly will set some limitations on whether you can drive down the cost even further. We also find it's a wrong understanding of the industry. There has been studies made here recently who showed that for example, in the solar industry, the value from polysilicon wafers, cells, and modules only constitute 30% of the value of solar PV industry, whereas inverters, installation, balance of supply actually constitutes 70%. This is a study that's been made with a joint research between the US and an Indian research firm illustrating this. The same example can be made by the wind industry, and maybe Pierre will be speaking about that. But the wind industry is driving a lot of local natural content when it's being installed in international markets. Not only the installation operation, but also the service and maintenance will be naturally localized. And there might be other possibilities in the full supply chain that can be localized. But that will run the normal competitive path of healthy industries. So finally, just glad that we have been celebrating this morning. So congratulations to the 14 governments for launching this important negotiations on tariffs. And certainly you can be assured that the City Alliance will be continuing its outreach, its advocacy on why these negotiations need to move fast and why you also need to make them broader while the first stage has been concluded. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Peter, and thank you for the work that you've been doing in promoting this this agenda. Pierre Tarton, and I hope that Pierre touches particularly on the value chain nature of the wind industry in today's economy.
Thank you very much, Chairman, and I'd like to thank ICTSD for organizing this very timely event. The European Wind Energy Association has been an early supporter of this initiative, and I just want to give you a quick snapshot of who we are. The European Wind Energy Association represents the views of the wind power sector in Europe. We have roughly 600 members from 50 countries, and we essentially represent the entire supply chain. I'd like to say just a few words on our link to trade policy. Trade policy has really been since the beginning a part of the DNA of this sector. We did a study a couple of years ago, and what we found is that roughly half of our members have activities outside the EU, and we've constantly had a positive trade surplus. And in fact, the European Commission pegs this at $2.5 billion in terms of net exports of wind power equipment. So you would assume that as a European Wind Energy Association, we would be proponents of this agreement, since it clearly benefits. We have a clear stake in this happening. What I'd like to emphasize, though, is that our stake in this goes much beyond that that mercantilistic point. It really cuts to the core of the main challenges of the industry for the moment. In fact, the European industry is dealing with dual and conflicting objectives for the moment. The European Union has been emphasized a little bit earlier, has very ambitious targets in terms of renewables deployment and fight against climate change. And the 2020 climate and energy package has been alluded to, so this is a very good starting point as far as we're concerned. However, there is a very legitimate demand from societies and governments for this deployment and this climate change abatement to be taking place as cost effectively as possible. This is extremely legitimate, and in fact we see this already in support mechanism levels going down, and we need to be able to keep up with that cost curve. This requires a number of different things, stable policies of course, investment in research and development, but it also requires having lean and effective global supply chains in order to source raw materials, processed products, semi-processed products, in order to be able to be as effective as possible and to draw on this global supply chain. And therefore, we consider that this agreement, this negotiation, which was launched today, is a critical political signal that is being sent to the industry to this end. So we need to come out of this contradiction of the necessity to bring costs down and the imperative of creating local value. I think this was correctly alluded to by Peter before. We see a rise of protectionist measures, and I think this agreement is also a signal of the global community that in fact open trade is really an avenue to develop the fight against climate change. So I'd just like to conclude on the process itself. We see this as an extremely important first step. We think that the attitude towards the list should be pragmatic, that the list of products should be products whose nature and contribution to climate change and environment is not debatable, whether it's absolutely the result of a consensus. And that the agreement on tariffs should be only the first step. Perhaps at a later stage, it would be extremely positive in our view to also tackle services and non-tariff barriers as well. We need to keep in mind, as mentioned before, that indeed investing in wind energy does create local value, and there are some activities associated with this supply chain that are inherently local, and in particular civil works, operation and maintenance. Another way to look at it is that there are indirect positive impacts in terms of growth, and whenever you invest €1 or $1 in wind power, you will create activity worth 15 cents in basic metals, 13 cents in electric and electronic equipment, 6 cents in transports, 6 in construction, and 3 in IT. And a lot of this activity will be local as well. So I think we need to have a broad view on the positive benefits, the macroeconomic benefits of investing in renewables. I think this is extremely important politically also because we're at a key moment ahead of the Peru and Paris negotiations on climate change, and we really need to seize this political momentum as far as we're concerned. Thank you.
Well, thank you very much, Pierre. I'm aware that it's 3:30 now, and that's what we had indicated in the agenda to adjourn. But I'm told by colleagues that we could go 15 minutes more. If people in the audience have questions, and some of you could stay with us here in the panel. So I'd like to open the floor for questions at this stage and comments. Yes, please.
Thank you again for this afternoon session. Very interesting, because we have both the government representative somehow and private sector. And what I have heard, I don't know if I misheard it, from the private sector, what could drive, how do I put it? What could be a disincentive to continue to invest on green energy projects is some of those trade remedies which my colleague from India brought up. So I heard it almost all from the 4 private sector representatives, and I heard also the response of our government representatives sitting in the panel. And I think for the government, well, I work for the Philippine mission to the WTO, so obviously I'm a government employee. This is always our dilemma. How do you balance? Because if a trade remedy is being imposed by a government, it's because an industry is pushing the government to do it. So this is always a dilemma of policymakers in government. And a follow-up question, if I may, because we'll be attending the next session also, is for those who launched the project this morning, and you're saying that this is a good first step, which I agree. I just wonder, as you move forward, if you want to attract more participants, where will your concentration be? To induce members to come in by limiting the number of products that you're covering right now? As of now, it's 54. Or you would like to do both? Because again, from experience, if you try to do both, sometimes you end up with nothing. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Let me just see if there's anybody else who would like to take the floor. I have Anya in the back and Johannes and Ron. Anya, please. If you could introduce yourself to the
Thank you very much. Anya van Moitke from UNEP. Well, first of all, congratulations to the members of this initiative for launching it. I think it can make an enormous contribution to fighting global climate change and also to transitioning to green economies. Thanks also to ICTSD and also to Ricardo to having mentioned one of the UNEP reports that indeed Achim Steiner launched at the United Nations Environment Assembly last week together with the Secretary General of UNCTAD and the Deputy Environment Minister of Ghana. This report focuses on South-South trade and trends in environmental goods and services trade. And indeed, the significance of South-South trade has grown immensely over the last years. And the share of developing countries in global exports of renewable energy more than doubled in the last 7 years. And I think it's particularly important to highlight the role of China here. And Ricardo has already given us some figures here that were highlighted in the report. But perhaps just to add one, the portion of developing countries as the destination for Chinese global PV exports increased from 6% in 2011 to 23% in 2013, and in wind power generation sets, this portion increased from 32% to 66%. So these are enormous figures, and they really sort of illustrate the enormous opportunities that there are also for developing countries in terms of job creation, in terms of spurring innovation, and mitigating climate change. I'll be very happy to share the report with you, but I would like to take the opportunity to just ask one question also in the context of South-South trade. Now, given, as Mahesh has indicated, the tariffs for many environmental goods are already quite low, and also given that there are many bilateral and regional agreements already, what can be the role of China and Costa Rica in particular to help motivate and incentivize other developing countries to accede to the initiative? Thank you very much.
Thank you, Anya. Johannes?
Thank you, Ricardo. Just 2 or 3 quick points. The first one is, if I may address to Madame Lee's discussion points regarding access or transfer of technology. And it would seem that if that is an area of keen interest for many developing countries, as it should be, perhaps one could look at facilitation or liberalization of trade and services as a vehicle for trying to achieve that objective, given that a simple liberalization of trade in goods, even if it be on environmental goods, would seem to almost require an act of reverse engineering for the host country to be able to acquire the necessary transfer of technology. On the other hand, if it were a matter of trade in services being facilitated, whether it be in terms of the operations of those facilities or maintenance of those facilities, there seemed to be more than just anecdotal evidence that this would seem to foster greater transfer, if not access to technology. So that's the first point. The second point is, if I may address the interventions of Monica and Jennifer, and this again relates to trade in services and the fact that any further liberalization on environmental services may have to be backloaded after the initial environmental goods output or outcome would have been obtained. Perhaps at this point, mindful of the fact that there are TISA negotiations ongoing, to what extent are energy services or renewable energy services being pursued by those countries you represent? It may be that, as when I was a negotiator, there seems to be some body of water or some lacuna which is not bridged between those who are handling environmental goods negotiations and those who are tackling services negotiations. To what extent, for instance, are your negotiators in environmental goods talking to your services negotiators to further this agenda? Thank you.
Thank you very much, Johannes. Just briefly, let's go to Ron and Hutao, and then I'll come back. So if you can be brief in your questions, please. Ron.
Ron Steenbrück from the OECD. It's not a question, just a very brief comment. And congratulations to Peter Brun for the SETI Alliance. It just occurred to me that maybe one of the things that needs to be continuously stressed here when you're talking about tariffs, particularly on cleaner energy, is that in most countries of the world, the tariffs on fossil fuels is very small or zero. So, you know, if you're only concentrated on tariffs, that's an important message that at the moment they're generally have on average higher tariffs.
Thank you, Ron. Hutao?
Yes, thank you, Ricardo. I want to give a short comment. From the environment perspective, I'm very glad to see the positive signals given by our negotiators. As Madam Lee specifically mentioned, the environmental needs, and Madam Jennifer Prescott also mentioned the environmental benefits. That means the negotiation in the future could be from not only the supply exporting driven motivations, and also from the environmental demand driven motivations. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Last quick question, Mahesh. You can be very brief.
My question was to Mr. Saurabh Sen. Saurabh, I know that your operations run through a large number of countries and companies. In terms of global supply chains, how do you see the role of service providers? I mean, your plants, for example, involve a lot of EPC contractors. Do you work with EPC contractors in the different countries, or do you also see some trade in services happening? Let's say in East Africa, if you've got to set up a project in Kenya, do you have people coming in from, say, Mauritius and Uganda, or is it mainly from Kenya? I mean, maybe just some examples in that regard. Thanks.
Very interesting. Thank you. Okay, so let me come back to the panelists and maybe ask in that order, Madame Lee, then Jennifer Prescott, Monica, Ambassador Savorio, to make some comments to the questions that they heard, and then I'll come back to the private sector. So, Madame Lee.
Thank you. Just a very brief response to some of the questions. With regard to the question raised by my Philippine colleague there about where the negotiation concentration, and we have the APEC list there, and also to expand the membership. I think this is an issue we need further discussion among the 14 participants. But as China's view, that we think that as we all agree that the APEC list should be our basis for further negotiation, so we should to find some way to ensure that those products will be incorporated and accepted by all the participants, and to find a way to ensure all those will be implemented, especially by the committed deadline of the APEC members. And so also it's important to expand the membership. Actually, it's an issue we have discussed a lot during the preparation stage for launch of this negotiation. We seek the necessity to have more members to be involved. So as I said, this depends on the further discussion among the 14 participants, but that is the initial thought from China's view. And the other question is about how to attract developing countries to join this initiative. And as I said before, actually we think it's a very important issue for this group to think about this, because the global challenge in front of us needs every country to respond to this. So we have different efforts like the negotiations in the United Nations and also in the other forum, and also we try to achieve the cooperation between bilaterally, such as mentioned by Monica about EU and China cooperation on this issue. So here in the WTO, there is also one aspect to response to the global challenge. So, but on the other hand, it's also important to ensure that we have as many participants to join as we can. So for our 14 participants, for the following discussions tomorrow and maybe in the future, we need to take this into account to ensure that this initiative will be attractive enough to the developing countries. So we have to take into account of the different structure and different challenge of developing countries, and also the need for development of the developing countries, and so the challenges they are facing on their way to meet the development demand and also the environmental demands. So in that case, we try to make the not only talking about the tariff reduction and elimination, but we also could, through some ways, to help them to build confidence that through such kind of liberalization, they will have better ways to address their environment problems, and in the meantime, they also can achieve their development objectives. As to the question about the technology diffusion, thank you for your comments to my intervention. Actually, there is always a view that liberalization of goods and services can automatically lead the access to the technology. And yes, I have to say that with the flow of trade and services, there is an opportunity for the technology flow. But I don't agree with the idea that could automatically flow from the China's experience from the past so many years liberalization in goods and services. As a government, there is a role to ensure that your policies is attractive enough and good enough to have such kind of technology flow. And on the other hand, I think for the exporting countries, their governments also have the role to play there. For example, if the exporting countries have such kind of policies to restrict such kind of technology flow, or to take some measures that will finally limit such kind of technology flow, that would not helpful, and that would not go together with the goods. I mean, the technology will not go out with the goods together. So I think it's finally it is not automatically, but liberalization has a role there. And for the Huta's comments on the balance of interest of export and import, I agree with that. Actually, when we are doing the domestic consultation, we always also look at the customers' perspective view to see how, while we will address the concerns of the export, we will also address of the users of the environmental goods. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Madam Lee. Jennifer?
Thank you. Just quickly, I just echo what Madam Lee said about the initiative, the agreement, building on the APEC list. So that is the common ground that brings us all together, and then we've committed to explore a broad range of additional products, and so that will be a large part of our discussions as we move forward. In terms of the question about TISA, about the services agreement negotiations, we are working very closely with our services colleagues to, one, identify the bundling issues, the goods and the services that we're increasingly seeing being bundled with in particular renewable energy products, as was mentioned earlier, in terms of many of the jobs associated with solar being in installation and maintenance, and so we're working to ensure that the interests of service providers are being advanced through the TISA negotiations as well, so working very closely with them. I'll also just make a plug for an OECD study that was done on climate-related services, really trying to map out the various different service sectors that are integral in terms of addressing climate change, which we've taken a close look at too. Thanks.
Thank you, Jennifer. Monica?
Yeah, thank you very much. I mean, I agree with much what was said just before me. On services, I mean, equally on the EU side, we're working extremely closely together with the colleagues who are negotiating the TISA agreement and with some of the international organizations also already mentioned. There was also mention before of a study by Sweden, so some of our member states have undertaken very valuable studies on this servicification issue, a difficult word to say. So we definitely want to ensure that that these processes can all be complementary. There is a distinction, of course, between what we would call traditional services. These are very clearly classified by UN Central Product Codes. These are, for instance, sewage services. I think these are clearly being addressed in TISA. There are also other services that are more horizontal, but are particularly important in a renewable energy industry, for instance, and these were already mentioned, such as engineering, technical analysis, management consulting, for instance. It is this second type of services that we think we should be also looking at when we are discussing the liberalization of those goods which or whose installations they, for instance, support. And we do think that having been now engaged in this negotiation will allow us to do that technical work. I think we also need to be realistic that it will take time. We have heard before in the morning from the floor of some experts here who have been trying to do that in the past. It will take time, and therefore, as previous speakers said, we don't think this is something for the immediate agreement. We will first focus on goods. At the same time, we are very much in favor of a built-in agenda to allow to also address those specific services issue in one way or the other in this agreement, complementary to what is being done in TISA.
Thank you, Monica. Ronald?
Thank you, Ricardo. Let me try to address this question. How to convince other developing countries, or how to make the case of this agreement for other developing countries. I really don't like to put this compartments. This is not an agreement designed for developed countries, nor is it an agreement for developing countries. It's up to members to decide. This is an agreement for everyone. Identify your bottlenecks. Look at your own policies and see whether it is useful for you or whether it is not. I come from a country of 4.8 million inhabitants. We came to the conclusion that we don't attract investment for such as a small market. Not industries will come to Costa Rica to produce to that small market. That can work for a handful of members of this House. For the rest, middle-sized and small-sized countries, attracting investment and being successful in exporting depends very much on your policies. What makes Costa Rica special in that region of the world, Central America? Why this performance in information technology, in medical devices, in highly sophisticated services? It's merely public policy. That's it. It's a country that has not been, that has not received the benefits of minerals, oil, as others, and it still exports more than the others in per capita terms. Why? Again, it's trade policy, or it's public policy. Look at your, as I said, look at what you need. Identify yourself with your own needs, and not with what the mainstream tell you. What is good and bad for developing countries. That's the first thing I reject. That kind of reasoning. This is good for developing countries, this is bad for developing countries. And what are those policies? Well, there is not a single policy. It was said that Costa Rica has very high levels of education. Alone? No, it was not. High levels of education were there in the 80s and 90s, but we had a very closed market. Was it then trade policy alone? No. We needed as well an investment policy that would allow investors to come and have a state of law that would allow them to come. So we very much see it as a combination, and that's why the puzzle that we made for ourselves contains information technology liberalization, ITA, services liberalization, TISA. When it comes to the protection of nature and the challenges with regard to climate change, this initiative for sure. But this initiative in combination with the others works even better. That's what I can say. I don't have a recipe that works for everyone. I will not put it that way. I just think that this could be a very good opportunity for many developing countries. And again, as I said in my first sentence, we realize that we cannot make industrial policy with trade policy because it doesn't work for small and medium-sized developing countries. I don't think that it works for any country, in fact, in the long run. So these are the elements that I can share with you that made my country take this kind of orientation in the negotiations here.
Thank you very much, Colonel. I think I'm looking at the time, and I'm going to have to just limit the next response to Surab, and then wrap up. So Surab, if you can be really very brief.
I want to answer two questions. First, Madam from the Philippines. I want to answer this question. I have heard the eminent panelists in this panel talk about it. Let me give you my perspective as a private sector person. I think and I believe that the policies any government embarks on, and I'm talking on my home country of India, my motherland, has to be for the benefit of the masses. 67 years after our independence, with a nation of 1.2 billion, we have not been able to electrify our country, bring clean water, sanitation, healthcare, education. Our country is highly underserved. There is a difference between the shining India and India doesn't have anything at all. If we restrict this panel production to a handful of companies that, very honestly, produce lower grade panels, who are we harming? We are harming our own country's infrastructure. The manufacturing lobby is pushing this without any merit, because as we all know in this room, to run a 100 megawatt plant, it doesn't take more than 10 people. It's mostly automated. The jobs are everywhere else. So I say what we got to do is what is best for the masses. And solar, I can tell you my company has set up a solar plant in Uttar Pradesh in 3 months. Land acquisition took 2 months. We set up a 2 megawatt project in Jhansi in 3 months. And we can see the change that power brings to the communities we have served. Because the communities we have served didn't have power before. Now there are night schools, there are venom centers, there's, a medical center, shadows of a hospital, not a hospital like you would see in this country. But so I think that we have to think about what is our agenda and what is our target. The second thing you also have to understand is if you are doing a plant with Indian panels, chances are most Indian banks won't finance you. I can tell you for sure, State Bank of India would not finance you. So your chances are to go out and borrow money from abroad. Well, I think it's not too far in the distant memory when we saw what happened to the Indian rupee last year, going from 55 to 67. And the government sat there doing nothing. So then your business, my business in this case, is exposed to severe foreign currency fluctuations. So you want to keep your debt in the country. But no banks would give you the loan because they also know these panels are substandard. Other thing that is important to note is when we are here adopting new technology, and it's a high technology industry, why would we go back and use something that's redundant? Because the manufacturing lobby is pushing it? I think we have better brains in the country to figure out what India should do. And I think India should not impose a local content or a trade barrier, because ultimately, a country like India with so much sunshine really has the ability. Look, in the US, it's a feel-good thing. Everybody in New York is putting a rooftop solar panel. That's a great thing to tell your friends at a Saturday party. Like, look, I have a rooftop solar. Okay, but that's not the case in India. It's a must-have. And that's what we, I think, fail to understand at times. The regimes and the demographics are very different. To the question that Mahesh asked, we are one company. We work in 4 or 5 domains. And what we have seen is, right now we have a team from India training in Turin. We have the Turin team, a team from Turin staying in Kenya, Mombasa right now, and Nairobi right now, teaching local engineers. We have tied up with local engineering colleges to teach the existing engineers how to do renewables, because it's a very nascent industry. So I think it not only brings collaboration between nations, it also uplifts the technology and the scientific knowledge that a person has being educated in the field of solar installation. Thank you.
Thank you, Surab. Apologies, Peter, but I think we have to close. We're very late, and I know some people have a meeting at 4 o'clock. I think that those comments, Surab, are very good, in a way, at the closing. I think what we have heard today is really a confirmation of a story about how this initiative, which again, with excuses from Monica, I'd like to say it's 41 members at the WTO, even though we refer to as the J14. The initiative that was launched this morning has a potential to address not only the questions of climate change through renewable energy, scale up, but also energy security and energy access. On energy security, it's something that hasn't been much discussed, but that I hope it's also going to be part of the discussions going forward, is the trend to interconnect national energy markets, something that is very much in the coming future, talking about international as well as global grids, and the kind of goods, services, technologies that are required in that effort. Something, again, that is coming up just in the next few years as probably an imperative. So I was saying it's not only confirmation of that potential, it's a story of value chains, it's a story of good domestic policies, as Ronald Savario rightly said, it's a story of global responsibility, it's a story of transfer of technology, of jobs that are generated through manufacturing and services, and it's a very positive story. It would be great if out of this headquarters in Geneva, we do have a real good story to tell and a contribution to make, again, as we move on the imperative of climate action towards Lima, the Lima COP at the end of this year, but hopefully by 2015 in Paris, you all have some results to demonstrate. Partial results probably as you continue to enhance the initiative. We will continue to work to try to bring other countries as well to the table by providing analytics and capacity where it's needed. Let me just close now here. Thank my colleagues for putting this event together. Thank the mission to the EU mission to the WTO for the assistance that they provided us, sponsoring us to do the meeting here at the WTO, as well as all of you in the panel here. And again, congratulate you and wish you the best of luck as you move forward in the negotiations. I'd like to remind you that there's a cocktail for participants in this seminar that starts at 18 hours at the atrium. It's a cocktail that we are sponsoring in company of the Chinese Association of Machinery Industry for Environmental Protection, the Japan Machinery Center for Trade and Investment, as well as the NFTC, the National Association of Manufacturers in the U.S., and the U.S. Council for International Business. So we'll expect you all to join us at that time. Thank you all very much for a really very rich and good discussion during the day. Thanks. Thank you.